morning. It is Thursday, January 29th, 2015. This is your morning edition on I-24 News with a special broadcast following yesterday's military flare-up on Israel's northern border. Two Israeli soldiers, Major Yochai Kalangel, 25 years old, and Sergeant Dor Chaim Nini, 20 years old, both of them from the Givati Brigade, were killed, and 7 more injured yesterday when their patrol vehicles were hit by anti-tank missiles fired by Hezbollah militants from Lebanon. The missile attack, which was accompanied by mortar fire on IDF positions in the area and nearby Mount Hermon, an empty home in the Arab village of Rajar was hit, but no one was injured. Israel responded with heavy artillery and airstrikes targeting Hezbollah-controlled territory in southern Lebanon. According to Lebanese reports, residents from border villages fled further north to escape the fire. UNIFIL, the UN force monitoring the Israeli-Lebanese border, said one of its peacekeepers, a Spanish national, was also killed in the exchange. Now, Hezbollah sources said the attack on the IDF patrol and bases was retaliation for an Israeli airstrike last week that killed 11 people traveling in a convoy in Syria, including the group's military commander in the country and an Iranian general that was in the vehicles with them. Now, ahead of consultations with Israel's senior defense officials, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to retaliate the deadly cross-border attack on the Lebanese border, saying that whomever is behind today's attack will pay the full price. Netanyahu placed the blame for the attack on Hezbollah, whom he said were acting on Iran's behalf, and he claimed that he held Syria and Lebanon responsible for any attacks emanating from their territory. Also, late last night, though, Hezbollah sent a message via UN sources, supposedly to Israel, that as far as Hezbollah, the group, is concerned, the attack or the flare-up is over. Now, joining me in studio to help make sense of it all, discuss the dramatic escalation in the north, is Dr. Amichai Magen, senior researcher at the IDC's Counterterrorism Institute. Good morning to you, Dr. Magen. Of course, also Amir Oren, senior military analyst on I-24, military analyst for Haaretz newspaper, and of course Ali Waked, senior Middle East analyst for I-24 News. Good morning to all of you. Before we begin our discussion, let's go live to I-24 News correspondent. So, well, he will be with us in a minute, Shai Ben Ari, up north. But first, let's take a look at the following report that recaps what happened yesterday on the Israeli northern border.
An already tense situation in Israel's north escalated further today as 2 Israeli soldiers were killed when an anti-tank missile was fired at Israeli military vehicles near the Lebanese border. Mortars were also fired towards the bordering Rajar village, where a home was damaged, and at IDF positions on Har Dov and the Hermon mountain. Hezbollah claimed responsibility, claiming its Quneitra Martyrs Brigade carried out the operation focused against the Israeli military.
Israel has no right to talk about the response to Hezbollah's anti-tank missile attack today, because this was a response to the Israeli attack in Quneitra. The attack today had no intention to open a new front in the north.
A Spanish UN peacekeeper in South Lebanon was also killed in the exchange of fire, and at least 7 Israeli soldiers were injured as Israeli military officials ruled out the possibility of an abduction, a situation Israel aims to avoid at any cost. As a result of the attack, the IDF responded with artillery fire and then with aerial strikes on a Hezbollah target in South Lebanon. Throughout the day, the Israeli Prime Minister and IDF Chief of Staff held an ongoing evaluation of the incidents.
For whomever is trying to challenge us on the northern border, I suggest wait and see what is happening there, with the situation similar to what happened in Sderot in Israel's south, bordering Gaza. Hamas, during the summer, suffered a major hit. It was the hardest hit they suffered since they were established. And the IDF is ready to respond with powerful force on all our borders.
This area of the Golan Heights is contested by Syria, Lebanon and Israel, following an alleged Israeli strike against a Hezbollah convoy in Syria last week, which killed 6 Hezbollah operatives and 6 Iranians, including a senior Revolutionary Guards general. Both Iran and Hezbollah vowed revenge in its aftermath. Wednesday's combined attack occurred a few hours after Israel's Air Force targeted Syrian military positions in the town of Quneitra overnight Tuesday in retaliation for a missile attack on Israel earlier in the day. Arab media reported that the strike targeted Division 90 of the military militias loyal to Assad and allied with the Lebanese Hezbollah organization.
As we said, in studio with us, Dr. Amichai Magen of the IDC Counterterrorism Institute. I'd like to start with you. I think there is an inclination for the public in the Middle East, so let's start with the Israeli public, to maybe try and question, or critics will say to try and question, the capital that was gained from what we saw in the last 24 hours. Clearly, this was an attack that was carried out because of an attack Israel, or supposedly Israel, carried out in Syria at the end of last week. But here we see a kind of a tit for tat, and there are those who will argue that 2 Israeli soldiers lost their lives in return for the life of Jihad Mournier, who is the son of a Hezbollah operative that was killed last week, supposedly by Israel. What was gained by all of this for Israel? That's the first question. And have we seen the end of it over the course of, for the next several weeks?
Look, we have to understand the latest flare-ups in the context of a very unstable equilibrium, a very complicated shadow war that is being fought between Iran, Hezbollah, also the Assad regime and Israel going on for a long time. Mostly this shadow war happens in the shadows, and occasionally it comes out to the sunlight, which is what we've seen happen yesterday. Israel's posture so far has been trying to dance a very delicate dance, and it's not always easy to dance that dance. On the one hand, Israel is not interested in getting entangled in the Syrian civil war or in Lebanon. Israel's strategic interest is to insulate its population, its economy, from the civil war in Syria, and it doesn't want to get entangled in Lebanon. On the other hand, Israel has to maintain deterrence against Iran and Hezbollah. And striking that balance is something that over time is very difficult to do, because this is a very unstable equilibrium. The situation in Syria and Lebanon today is radically different from what it was in 2006. The degree to which Iran calls the shots in Lebanon, in Syria, is different from what it was in the past. And so this is a very unstable equilibrium. Why did Israel make the decision to strike? The more we learn about the motivations, and of course there are things that we don't know, it seems that this more and more fell into enforcement of the 3 red lines that Israel has set out, that it will not allow the transfer of quality weapons to Lebanon. It will not allow the establishment of a strategic missile threat from Syrian territory to threaten Israel, and it will not allow the leakage of the Syrian fighting into Israeli territory. The more we learn about last week's incident, the presence of the Iranian general, the level of penetration of revolutionary guards in Syria. But with many conflicting reports, Israel, some security sources saying that they didn't know the Iranians were going to be there, that it wasn't the target, etc., etc. I mean, it's opaque. I agree with you. There are a lot of missing variables here, and we don't know the full extent of the story. But the more we learn about what happened last week, the more it seems that there is weight to be given to the idea that this group of people was struck in order to avoid steps that were being taken to establish a missile threat from Syria onto Israel.
Yeah. I mean, Oren, I'm going to move on to you and ask you, has Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just been saved by Hezbollah when it comes to stopping a war? Because when Hezbollah comes out last night and says, as far as we're concerned, this incident is done.
Well, it's a tragedy, and in a tragedy, the characters are forced to play out their roles, even though they may know better. Israel had to take out this joint Hezbollah-Iranian convoy a week and a half ago, because they were planning the very sort of attacks which we saw yesterday. And Israel had to preempt because it couldn't stand still. Now, whether a justified move was conducted by justified means is another question. Israel had better done it in by covert means, by, for instance, a commando raid.
I'm asking you about the timing, because if you say that Israel had to take out that convoy on the 18th of January, well, first of all, did it have to in that specific time? Isn't it true, and I'm not saying that makes it right, that those convoys have been kind of something that is part and parcel of that part of the border for quite a while? The timing is questionable, and the way it was done.
Yes, but when you have a group of operational planners who are assembled at the same time in the same place.
You
and
strike.
they are going to be dispersed. So this is a sort of a professional debate, and many people in the Israeli Defense Forces were against conducting this particular raid in this particular fashion. But once this was done, the result was inevitable. It was inevitable that Hezbollah will respond, and the tragic fact is that had the first attacks taken any Israeli life, even one single life, this would have been over. Because they failed to some extent, Hezbollah had to do it again until some bloodletting took place, and this is the Middle East. This is a sort of a ritual killing.
Yeah, the ritual killing, because the tragic bit of it that it feels like, and people are saying this morning, and I'm quoting other other reports, that it feels like 2 Israeli soldiers were paid for the life of the son of Imad Mornier, of Jihad Mornier. But, when it comes to Hezbollah, and Ali Waqid, I want to ask you, I mean, Hezbollah yesterday essentially stopped a war in many ways with that statement. Correct me if I'm wrong. And isn't it true also, and was that the calculation, that they cannot afford a war on that front right now?
Yeah, it appears that the long years that Hezbollah and Israel spent together made the two sides understanding each one the language of the other. This is why the Israeli captured very well the message sent by Hezbollah to UNIFIL, saying that the organization is not interested in an escalation. And according to some sources in Lebanon, there was also an Israeli message that the Israelis are not going to an escalation. And the fact that Hezbollah immediately after the operation sent a message to his rivals and partners in the political arena in Lebanon explained also the fact that the criticism was very moderate and very reserved from the anti-Hezbollah camp in Lebanon. Besides Samir Jaja, the Christian anti-Hezbollah and anti-Syria leader, we did not hear serious criticism, because it was obvious and it was understandable by the Lebanese forces that Hezbollah needed to retaliate to last week attack, and he did it in a very measured way, in an area that it is agreed upon that this is the way, the place, the ideal place for Israelis and Hezbollah if they need to fight. This is the place which no one passes any red line. And speaking lines, for example, Hezbollah did not arrive the blue line. Hezbollah had some chances maybe to try to kidnap a body or a soldier, and it did not do so. And all the signs in the region show that this was a unilateral attack that has no continuation. No continuation
to save face. And Dr. Morgan, I'm asking you, because you said that situation is very complex, but as Ali described and as Amir described, isn't it still incredibly dangerous to play with these explosive little tidbits? If you do this attack, and in the 18th of January, if one does so, if Israel carried that attack, with all these parameters, it's still incredibly dangerous.
It is dangerous when you're dealing with relatively simple actors with a unified command and control, where you have functioning states. It is exponentially more dangerous when you are operating in such a complicated environment with so many actors. We haven't mentioned the Assad regime. We haven't mentioned rebel groups that may be interested in drawing Israel into some kind of action against the Assad group. We don't quite know whether the Iranian calculus is identical to that of Hezbollah. This is a very complicated situation. I want to caution us against a firm conclusion that this is over.
No, very true.
I think that we need to be very careful about that. One, because the ability of both Iran and Hezbollah to react and to harm Israel is not limited to a direct attack on the northern border. Hezbollah is a global organization today. It could strike in Latin America, it could strike in Asia, it could strike in Europe, it could strike against an Israeli target, it could strike against a Jewish
very right.
target.
I'm taking it back. I'm saying, this round maybe for the next, let's hope not just for the next several hours.
And I think that also part of the complexity is that we have a lot of moving pieces here and strategic needs. So it is true, as Ali said and others have said, that Hezbollah is bogged down in Syria. It's not interested in opening a full-front war with Israel. At the same time, Hezbollah has come under increasing political pressure within Lebanon for abandoning its raison d'etre. And its raison d'etre is to be the resistance against against Israel. And it has not really done that since 2006. And I'm not quite convinced that this limited action in the last 24 hours restores to Hezbollah the kind of credibility that it needs to do, particularly if Hezbollah intends to continue to be involved in the Syrian civil war, deeply involved, to lose fighters and so on and so forth. I'm not quite sure that this is over, and I'm not quite sure that as far as the Iranians are concerned, the closer that we get to the deadline of the nuclear negotiations on the 24th of March 2015, there will not be an Iranian interest to signal, not just to Israel, but also to the United States, you better come to an accommodation with us, because if you don't, we can hurt you and your allies.
Before we continue, I want to go straight to the northern border of Israel right now, and I-24 News correspondent there, Shai Ben Ari. Shai, good morning to you. The situation, how tense, how many soldiers, and what is the feeling up there at the border right now this morning?
Right, yeah. Well, it's a fairly tense morning as people await, developments with this rather unordinary situation following the incidents yesterday. But of course, the general feeling is that perhaps this incident is winding down and the worst is behind us. That appears to be at least the interest on both sides of the border, with messages even being conveyed through certain channels. Apparently, both sides interested in, let's say, getting off the ladder. But details emerging from the initial inquiry into this incident. Basically, we're talking about a case where around five Hezbollah fighters basically fired a barrage of anti-tank missiles from what Israel at least considers to be the Lebanese side of the international border. Talking about 6 missiles being fired in the direction of a military convoy, 5 vehicles. One of the missiles hit the first vehicle in the convoy, a D-Max vehicle, in which were sitting the company commander, a 25-year-old major, and his 20-year-old driver, a first sergeant. Both were killed. Once this vehicle was hit, the rest of the soldiers in the convoy emerged from their vehicles as the barrage continued. Another vehicle was hit, a Jeep, but that was empty by the time it was hit, and thankfully only injuries resulted from the rest of the barrage. Another missile hit a house inside the village of Rajar, which was damaged. Also no injuries in that case. But overall, we're talking, of course, about 7 medium to light injuries, 2 killed, and that was basically the incident yesterday. Basically, that is the situation, and these are the details emerging from the initial inquiry.
And Shai, just checking with you as you're up there, and I think you've spent the night up there, the feeling of the civilian population, the civilian population in and around, is there a feeling that they want this to continue and be resolved once and for all, or everybody's happy, and I'm putting this in a very layman's terms, that this round is over, if it indeed is over?
The feeling that we're getting is that there's a lot of hope that things will basically go back to normal. I don't think in this case we're talking about any sort of expectation that the problems here with Hezbollah will be solved once and for all. As you might say, is the situation along, let's say, the Gaza-Israel border, where there is an expectation, certainly by the citizens there, that some sort of either agreement be reached, or perhaps even some sort of military operation to, let's say, bring down the Hamas regime. In Lebanon, there's no doubt that the situation is much more complex, and I don't think anyone harbors any sort of illusions that Hezbollah might be going anywhere. As far as optimism, I think people here are hoping for some sort of quiet, lasting quiet. That people understand, of course, that Hezbollah is bogged down with all sorts of problems of its own, namely what's going on this side of the border. We're talking about the Syrian border. Hezbollah has already suffered 1,000 casualties in the context of the Syrian civil war, and that is showing no signs of abating at the moment. They are tied down in that conflict for the foreseeable future. And it's clear that Hezbollah has no real interest in let's say, developing a new sort of parallel conflict on this side of the border.
This side of the border.
I think both sides seem to have a vested interest in quieting down.
One can only hope. Shai Ben Ari with us on the northern border. We'll be checking in with you later throughout the show. Thank you for being with us at this point. Ali, I want to ask you, is this, when we said that about Hezbollah, and, I find the equilibrium that has been actually, the relationship between Israel and Hezbollah, sort of everybody knows that this is supposedly what Hezbollah needed. Is this what Hezbollah needed to save face within Lebanon? If we're talking about the fact that there had to be some sort of a reaction coming from them for the attack of January 18th, is this something that maintains their power within Lebanon? Is it something that they have to maintain as their cause célèbre?
Absolutely, but Yael, I want to mention one thing. We in Israel, we tend to underestimate the needs, the internal local political needs of Hezbollah and the internal identity identity of Hezbollah, not only as we see Hezbollah here in Israel as an Iranian tool. Hezbollah has a very strong identity. Hezbollah is a very strong actor in Lebanon. Hezbollah is the defender and the leader of the biggest community, ethnic community in Lebanon. While we were yesterday covering what was going on up north, the Hezbollah leadership was also busy in its internal calculation. There was a vote for the 17th time in the Lebanese parliament about electing a new Christian president, a crisis, a constitutional crisis that Hezbollah is deeply involved in. And we had in mind that the Hezbollah leadership was only focused on the war with Israel and what is happening in Israel. And I can tell you that the Hezbollah was more occupied and busy and involved in this internal game in Lebanon. And this explains the need of Hezbollah not to open a new front, not only because of being involved in Syria.
It will all come down to the last week in March because, as you mentioned, the Iranian nuclear talks and the Lebanese presidential elections, if they are going to be held at the time allotted. This is, again, last week in March. And a week earlier, the Israeli elections, which will probably not be decided the day people go to the ballots, but only later in the political haggling. But if you can spare a minute, a long time on the air, of course, regarding the
before the next war,
regarding the geography there and why the attack took place where it did. The western half of the northern Israeli border goes back to the armistice lines of 1949. This is the Israeli-Lebanese border. From the Mediterranean to the same point Shai Ben Ari
we're standing at.
Now, this has been legitimized to a great extent, even though Hezbollah has some claim regarding it. The other part, Israel occupied on the very last day of the Six-Day War. And this is a sort of a finger jutting into Lebanon in dispute between Syria and Lebanon. This is why Hezbollah yesterday had a position some 5 kilometers from the place the vehicles were hit, which was about 2 kilometers inside the Israeli-held territory. It didn't get close to the border so as what Ali referred to kidnap those soldiers hit in the attack. It stood off far from the border because the very sophisticated anti-tank weapons now enable Hezbollah to attack from afar. They don't have to infiltrate the border in order to conduct an attack, and if the Israeli intelligence and operational forces do not find out in advance, it is very hard to defend against that.
Then asking about the future, and it's a horrible thing to say because it's not an if, it's a matter of when. Asking about the future on Dr. Amichai Magen of the IDC, I'm wondering with you out loud, and that's why I asked you why this is so dangerous, what Amir Oren is describing. The capability of Hezbollah at this point, if there was war to develop, is incredibly strong, isn't it?
It is. Hezbollah is the strongest, in a way, after the IDF in Israel's immediate geostrategic environment. Not talking about Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Egypt, but in among the actors around us that could threaten us militarily, Hezbollah, even though it's officially not a state army, it's a militia, is very heavily armed. And let me just give you a couple of pointers about that. Again, when we compare Hezbollah to 2006, let alone to the 1990s or 80s, we're talking about a qualitatively different fighting force. In terms of the number of rockets pointing at Israel, we now estimate that whereas in 2006 Hezbollah had something along the lines of 40,000 missiles, today it's closer to somewhere between 80 and 100,000. Much more importantly is the quality of the weaponry. You mentioned the anti-tank capabilities, but there's also the Ahont missile that can essentially hit an Israeli naval or civilian ship in Haifa port from Lebanese territory.
Or a gas derrick, which is
or a gas,
even more vulnerable.
Or a gas if we're looking at the northern border.
We're talking about drone technology, we're talking about bunkers, tunnels. This is a fighting force, and we tend to look at the cost.
Then isn't this incredibly dangerous? I mean, I go back to my question
this is why the equilibrium is so unstable. And we've spoken about the internal Lebanese calculations. We also have to look at the other side of the coin, which is the internal Israeli calculation. And there are two important points here.
It's political there. It's also political here, and we know
that. Yes, but it's strategic. It's not political in a party political sense, I would like to believe.
Okay.
It more has to do with strategic calculations. And so the first thing that my sense is that Israel militarily, strategically, will not tolerate the kind of war of attrition and the kind of drips and drops of rockets coming from the north that we've seen in the south. I think that that's a red line as far as Israel is concerned, which makes the leeway for tolerating these kinds of flare-outs much more constrained, and the possibility of escalation higher. At the same time, because Hezbollah's power is growing, because its fighting experience in Syria is not just a cost to Hezbollah, but it's also an asset to Hezbollah.
Training.
With time, the calculus for Israel about when to take action against Hezbollah will change. And given that the ideology of Hezbollah and Iran are unlikely to change in the future, given that we are on a collision course, given the sensitivity of the nuclear negotiations, it looks as if we are going towards... the potential for escalation is much higher than it was in the last few years.
That is, I think that, and sadly all the time with that will make the war over the summer in the Gaza Strip between Israel and Hamas
look like a walk in a park.
Exactly, look like a kindergarten play. Sadly, all the time we have on this incredibly depressing note, but thank you all for joining me. When we'll be back with more of yesterday's attacks and analysis, including a roundup of the political reactions in Israel. At first, let's hear some more of the morning headlines. Welcome back to the Morning Edition, I-24 News on this January 29th, 2015. Thank you for staying with us. We continue our special broadcast, taking a look at yesterday's events in the northern border of Israel. With us in studio, Colonel in Reserve Miri Eisen. Good morning to you. She's the former international media advisor at the Prime Minister's office under Ehud Olmert. Of course, also I-24 News senior news editor Ruti Sinai, who I do not leave home without. Good morning to you. And of course, also Times of Israel DC correspondent Rebecca Shimoni-Stoli, who will be joining us via Skype from Washington for reactions from that administration. But before anything else, let's talk about the American administration. Jen Psaki, the spokesperson of the State Department yesterday, had the following thing to say when it comes to the Israeli-Lebanese flare-up on the northern border. Let's see the American reaction from late last night.
We support Israel's legitimate right to self-defense and continue to urge all parties to respect the blue line between Israel and Lebanon as prescribed by UNSCR 1701. We also, of course, condemn the act of violence and will be watching the situation closely.
You condemn the act of violence. You're referring to?
The attacks.
The Hezbollah attacks?
Yes.
Okay. Just on a technical question, there are some who have made the argument that this area, Sheva Farms, is Israeli-occupied Lebanon. What's the U.S. position on this, on the status of this area?
I'd have to check with our legal team on the specific status, Matt. I'm happy to do that.
Rebecca from Washington, D.C., Times of Israel, Washington, D.C. correspondent. Thank you for joining us. Beyond the laconic response, and I will hold myself back and not say anything about having to check the geopolitical situation of the Sheva Farms. Yes, let's nod on that one. I'm sure there was much concern in Washington yesterday that another front might be opening up in the Middle East. Do we believe, because we're probably speaking in theory, that there was a lot of pushing on the White House part to try and stop this? And how?
Well, I think that the major push today on the part of not just the White House, but pretty much everybody around here, is to simply avoid any additional escalation. I think that for Washington, the idea of a flare-up, particularly a major flare-up between Hezbollah and Israel right now, seems deleterious to say the least, given the impact not just on the immediate region, but also the potential impact on Iran talks and, of course, on America's own attempts against ISIS.
And that's exactly, the question. When it comes to the Iranian talks with the United States, Hezbollah being, of course, everybody's, a proxy army of Iran, many will argue, that actually it's a true fact. When it comes to that, and we're looking at the reaction from the State Department, would that, that would probably put the kibosh on those talks, wouldn't it?
Well, actually, later on in the press briefing, Jen Psaki was directly asked, will this have any effect on the Iran talks? And if you want a laconic answer, the answer was, no, it will not.
Okay, no, it will not, period. But, and we're looking at that reaction, and it's Jen Psaki that's coming out, and I'm asking you, Rebecca, as opposed to the White House itself, does it have any type of meaning when we're putting out just a spokesperson of the State Department rather than somebody, because everybody in this region, I got to tell you, yesterday, we're gearing up for, oh my God, here's another round of war. So does it mean anything that Jen Psaki's coming out having to check her notes as opposed to, let's say, John Kerry or in actuality, the President of the United States?
Well, you've hit on a point that I think is very interesting and I thought was very compelling all day, that there seems to be a real desire here in Washington to downplay the significance of yesterday's events as much as possible. If you even looked at the amount of responses coming out of Congress, and there's a number of reasons why this could be true, there just wasn't a lot of reaction relative to what we saw, for instance, this summer in response to some of the incidents.
Yep, exactly that. And just the reaction that everybody's, if we don't react, maybe it will not happen. Thank you, Rebecca. I hope you can stay with us. Joining me in studio, as we mentioned, Miri Eisen, former advisor to the Prime Minister's office under Ehud Olmert, and of course Ruthie Sinai. Before we touch on some headlines, I'm looking at these reactions because I know you for 10 years, and you are one of the people who are giving out reactions on the part of the government. When you looked at the reactions from the Israeli government yesterday, well, let's start with the decision-making process. How does one qualify what happened yesterday if they're sitting in the Prime Minister's office or as an advisor? This is clearly a direct result from an attack that supposedly Israel carried out about 10 days ago in Syria.
Well, one of the questions that we always have to ask is that, can you nowadays act as if you haven't done an action? One of the ways that Israel has responded in decision-making process in general is that we don't claim responsibility. If you don't claim responsibility, it isn't really you, or you allow the other side to try and play this kind of game, which is something which has happened a lot, certainly on this Syrian-Lebanese front. What we're not talking about right now is the fact that we keep saying Hezbollah, Hezbollah, but all of us know that this is Hezbollah, Syria, Iran. You can't disconnect the three together. And in the decision-making process, this isn't just about Hezbollah. It's about Hezbollah in Syria. It's about Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran. And if you continue now in the decision-making to do something in response, you're not just responding to what Hezbollah did yesterday. You're responding on a much broader front. And you have to look at that in the decision-making process. And all of this, all of the time, the framing in the world, I was just sitting, watching now, I've been following this in the last 24 hours. The framing in the world is very much what we heard in that question in the United States at the State Department, which is they're saying that this was happening on Israeli-occupied land, meaning this is a place which is in dispute. And I'm thinking to myself, that's exactly the sort of framing which is trying to put it into a place where Israel is on the defensive. However, that's the smart aspect of what Hezbollah did. In 2006, Hezbollah did a cross-border attack onto Israeli territory. I could stand up then as the spokesperson and state clearly they entered into Israel and everybody was on our side. What they did yesterday is they attacked exactly in the spot where they understand that the world is going to say, oh, that's the disputed territory. It's, by the way, it's not the Golan Heights. It's one of those even more problematic situations. I would hand it back to the United Nations. For the last 6 years, and I'm not sure how much people are aware of that, the United Nations are the ones who have a special commission to define if that area belongs to Syria or Lebanon. This isn't about Israel. And Israel has said for years that if they open up and talk about it, then we would consider our moves. We never said that we would not move out of there. But that's a dispute that the United Nations has never resolved. They don't want to bring that out, and I wonder why.
No, it's and a fascinating point. But speaking of exactly what you said in terms of the reactions in the world, be it, trying to dumb it down within Congress, nobody really reacting to it, or be it, the strategic position of where Hezbollah made this attack, I'm wondering how this was played also in the press. As you said, you followed Ruthie Sinai with us. The headlines that this got yesterday, I mean, I felt like, I think by 5 o'clock in the afternoon yesterday, we were all at war.
Yeah,
we were all in full-blown war. Much to blame also us in the media. One can say, but, what were the headlines?
Yeah.
What did we look at?
Okay. First of all, it was played very, widely in all media. I mean, it was top of the websites and front page and so on. What I found very interesting was the Daily Star, Beirut Daily Star, which, if I may say, as a veteran journalist, is a textbook example of how you do journalism. Now, this is a newspaper, a widely read newspaper in basically an enemy state, and yet they played it straight. This side says so-and-so, Israel says so-and-so, Hezbollah says so-and-so. They basically didn't buy into the Hezbollah narrative, which is, we killed 15 people,
which
we hit 9 cars,
right.
All this bravado. They played it really straight, and I have to hand it to them.
No, Hezbollah ambushed kills at least 2 Israeli soldiers. Sadly,
it had the Spanish soldier, and it was just, really
straightforward. Amelia, you want to say?
I want to say that I find it very interesting because last week, after the alleged Israeli attack on the Golan Heights, I was watching the Saudi newspapers, and I saw the same type of interesting framing where I even commented on it, that it was informative rather than judgmental. Mm-hmm. And in general, when we're looking at the coverage in the Arab world, usually they're going to show, the Israeli Zionist, whatever. Yeah. And in this case, the fact that they're showing an informative shows that there is a very broader aspect going on, that connection of Hezbollah, Iran. Everybody's wondering how that plays in, exactly. And the way it goes into Lebanon, because that Syrian civil war is already on the Lebanese
on the Lebanese war for 3 years. And speaking of, the reactions now, everybody's looking at it. I'm putting the girls in studio to join me on the conversation. We're joined on the phone by Likud member Dani Danon with us on the phone this morning, because all these reactions in the press and how this is being covered is essentially what we're looking at this morning. The war, quote unquote, I'm saying at this stage seems to be over. Mr. Danon, do you feel that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been, and I'm going to use again, quote unquote, somewhat saved by Hezbollah, who are the ones who actually came out yesterday with a statement saying that as far as they're concerned, this escalation is over and they stopped it?
Well, I think we said it very clearly in the past that we have no intention for escalation in the region, but at the same time we cannot accept the reality where Israeli troops are being attacked inside Israel. I think we all understand that there will be a reaction. We will decide when and where it will take place. At the same time, we have no intention for full escalation.
Yes.
Mr. Danon, do you think, though, when you say we have no intention of full escalation, that you usually are much more outspoken than that? And Foreign Minister Lieberman, for instance, said that Israel should react disproportionately. How come this time you're kind of low-key on this?
I'm not low-key. I'm saying very clearly that we have to react, and we have to make sure that Hezbollah will pay a heavy price for their act of violence. But at the same time, we have to send a clear message that by reacting, by making sure that Hezbollah understands not to mess with us, we don't want to lead to full escalation, but we cannot leave the Hezbollah being in charge, being the one who's actually deciding when we start the conflict and when we end it.
Mr. Danon, there's an argument that, some argue in Israel that, at the end of the day, when we look at the war throughout the summer, which was just 6 months ago, I think a little bit less than that, many will argue in Israel, there are those who will criticize and say that not much was achieved. And then we're looking at what happened on the northern border yesterday. What was achieved, essentially?
Well, it is not a game that we can score points and decide who is winning by points. I think we have to build our deterrence. We have to make sure that our enemies understand that we are capable of hurting them. And we need to realize that we have elections in Israel, but our enemies do not have any recess. They continue plotting to hurt us in Iran, in Lebanon, some in Syria. That's why we have to make it very clear that with all due respect to the internal elections, we are ready to make sure that Israel is a safe and strong nation.
But, Mr. Danon, you said that Hezbollah needs to understand that they can't mess with us. That's great, but what they're telling us, in fact, is also you can't mess with us. We or allegedly Israel killed some of their people, and then they killed 2 of our people.
Well, I I will not confirm and neither deny any activities, but I can tell you one thing for sure. Wherever we will see people plotting to hurt Israel, we will take action against them. It can be very close to our border or very far away from our border, but that is our main message. Even if it will take place a day before the elections, we will take action against those who are plotting, who are very close to send missiles or to hurt Israel.
Okay. Mr. Danon, the Likudim Committee Chairman, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
I want to go back to reaction, though, Mir Eisen, because as you mentioned, you were at the line of fire, so to speak, when it comes to I don't want to say defending Israeli actions, but explaining actions. Still back to the decision process on this. When we look at what happened over the course of the last 24 hours, and maybe over the course of the last 10 days, what was achieved? I mean, is this deterrence for Israel? In your educated opinion, does this show deterrence? Because even if Mr. Danon says that it's about deterrence, it's not about scoring points, it does feel like scoring points.
Isn't it funny, Elle? It's that sort of thing where you kind of wonder, so how do you score on the deterrence card? And ladies and gentlemen, that is the biggest problem. And we're only ladies here today, right?
Yes.
That is the biggest problem, because you don't have a scorecard when it comes to deterrence. Successful deterrence, you actually never know that you were successful, because you deterred the other side from doing something and they didn't do it, and thus they're not doing something. Is that successful? But I want to go back to that decision-making process, because in the decision-making process, I want to be clear, it's very obvious to those sitting around the table, it's part of the discussion at the table, that there will be a response. And that doesn't mean that you don't do the action. It means that you sit and say, is it worthwhile to take an action knowing that there's going to be a response?
But given the dangerous situation with the three axes, so to speak, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, at the decision-making process, where the region has been so unstable, isn't that, I'm asking for your opinion, a dangerous calculation? Of course, you don't stop an action that, had it not ended with Hezbollah yesterday stopping the game, we could have seen something completely different. And it's not a war with Gaza. I mean, it's a war with an enemy that has much more than rudimentary missiles.
I have more, I want to say, respect for the decision-making process, having sat inside over the years, that these decisions are not made lightly, and they're not made without understanding the implications. This government, and it doesn't matter if you agree with it or not right now, has been very consistent in its policy when it comes to both Syria, the civil war, the involvement of Hezbollah, and the involvement of Iran. And they've been consistent to the degree that allegedly, according to international press, as we like to say, Israel has consistently attacked only the type of, and we've never taken responsibility, but we've done things where we've said those are places where this could be against Israel. And Hezbollah on the Golan Heights, Yael, impacts Israel.
No, that is a clear point. When we get back, we'll have more headlines with the Sinai and more political impacts. Of course, stay with us first. Let's go back to the morning headlines. Welcome back. It is still Thursday, January 29th, 2015. Welcome back to our special broadcast on I-24 News covering the military escalation up on the northern border of Israel with Lebanon. Yesterday, with me in studio is Colonel on Reserve Attai Shelach, former commander of the IDF's elite engineering unit, Yahalom. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
And, of course, I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev. Tal, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you for being with us. And we begin on your turf, Tal, actually, keeping in mind that we are just weeks ahead of elections, 47 days, I think, to be exact. And looking at, this will definitely have all kinds of political implications. I want to first take a look at a report that you had for the channel last night and break it down from there.
Though the Middle East conflict is ongoing and has at times flared up far from an Israeli election day, there are times when the proximity between the two seems suspicious. In 1996, several months after Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, Shimon Peres, who replaced him, launched a large-scale operation in southern Lebanon after a long period of tension between Israel and Hezbollah, which had been launching cross-border rockets. But the results were devastating for Peres, politically and militarily.
We are not bloodthirsty, we are not seeking adventures. I mourn every man, woman and child who died on any side of the border.
Peres lost the Israeli Arab vote and eventually the campaign to Benjamin Netanyahu. The 2008-2009 operation in Gaza is another interesting example of how war and elections go hand in hand in Israel. After he was sharply criticized for supposedly mishandling the 2006 Lebanon war, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert launched a series of airstrikes on Gaza following repeated rocket fire from the enclave. Although Olmert's popularity rose during the war, he had to quit the race over corruption charges, and his party lost the campaign only a month after the operation ended, once again, to Benjamin Netanyahu.
People want change. People want to take a different path. Our camp has won.
Netanyahu himself was in the middle of a military and political campaign in 2012 when he led Operation Pillar of Defense, which ended 2 months before the general elections. Netanyahu, as opposed to Peres and Olmert, won those elections. Some may say that launching military operations in such close proximity to an election is cynical and irresponsible, but history has shown that these operations, in most cases, did not help the leaders, who lost the campaigns or in other cases were unable to increase their political power. One thing is sure, when the cannons roar, political disputes in Israel are silent and most of the country stands behind its leader, at least until the cannons stop firing.
Joined in studio by Tal Shalev, I-24 News diplomatic correspondent. A unified support, actually, across the political spectrum. That indeed, in that respect, the report is right? Nobody really raised their head and said, why is this happening now?
Well, Netanyahu's main rivals did suspend their political attacks yesterday, especially the leader of the leaders of the Zionist camp, now known officially as the Zionist Union, the Labor and Atnua. None of them, not Tzipi Livni or Yitzhak Herzog, are challenging Netanyahu's assumptions or even challenging anything regarding this operation. No one wants to be seen electioning or campaigning under fire. This could backlash from the public opinion. And the only one that has been speaking out and traditionally does speak out is the left-wing party Meretz, who traditionally has something to say about confrontations and does challenge the leadership's assumption on this issue. But the fact is that nobody really knows what is the political impact of such confrontations. It's true that in the past there have been cases that have gone both ways. In one way, they can strengthen the current leadership, but there have been many cases, especially in Israeli history, as we saw in this recent piece, that in which confrontations and times of security tensions did lead to a regime change. And this is why everyone is quite cautious about this. But the feeling is that, at least from the Israeli Prime Minister point of view, even though it does serve him quite well, that the agenda is diplomatic or security or foreign policy, and that diverts the agenda from the socio-economic agenda, one he is not as strong in. But on the other hand, Netanyahu does not want a full-blow or wide-scale escalation here, because he does know that that could definitely damage him in the polls and could damage him even further in the situation at the moment.
Down the line, we are also joined on the phone now by Nachman Shai from the Zionist Union Party, right? Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, that's the right name of the new party.
The right name of the new party is the Zionist Union. Thank you for being with us. I'm wondering out loud, because you are part of the opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu right now, and clearly there is a sweeping, there's always been a sweeping agreement, understanding in Israeli politics at times of war, everybody is joining in. We're not looking, I'm hoping that, I'm not wrong in saying we're not looking at war right now. But when it comes to the other side of the political spectrum, the left, the center, which you're part of, is there any kind of, why isn't anybody actually standing up asking questions that many in the media are asking? Was this the right time for military escalation? Was this the right time for an alleged attack in Syria on Jihad Mornia? Is this the right time to flare up the border?
Well, it's not the right time. There's never a right time for a war in this country, since we have had so many of them. Wars and all kinds of military conflicts. We don't need another one. So there's no good timing for a war. The question is whether we invited this escalation or it just happened.
Exactly.
This attack that you rightly mentioned as an unknown force that attacked this convoy along the Syrian border, of course triggered a series of retaliations, which I'm not sure are over. But that should be taken into consideration at the beginning, not now. Now we are engaged in a mini conflict between us, Syria, Hezbollah, and Iran. And my opinion and my position is that we have to calm it down and to do everything we can in order to resolve it as much as possible peacefully without additional violence.
So
that's what I believe.
In many ways, do you believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu was semi-saved by Hezbollah when they kind of ended it yesterday with a statement via the UN that, as far as they're concerned, this incident is over?
I don't understand. I mean, did you ask about the policy taken by Netanyahu?
Yes. I mean, do you think that actually, first of all, if everybody wants this not to escalate right now, though yesterday did feel like war, do you believe that actually Prime Minister Netanyahu was saved by Hezbollah when they ended it yesterday? Because wasn't
I think that Netanyahu is not interested in a war right now. It doesn't serve him. And with all the respect, it doesn't serve the state of Israel, which is more important than Netanyahu. And also this consideration which Tal mentioned, whether in time like that, Netanyahu functions better than the opposition because he can set the agenda and so on, it's nonsense. Why? Because I'm not sure that a war, any war, and especially now, 6 or 5 months after the terrible summer that we've had, serves anyone. The major achievement of the Prime Minister is to avoid wars, to prevent them from breaking out, and not to initiate them or running them. So I think that any war is against his own interest. And I believe that the best thing Netanyahu can do now is to close the circle, as it was done yesterday, and not to add anything. And if we have to remember something in mind, and we all remember so many things in mind, let's wait for the good, to better timing, place and time, as we always say, to respond. But not now. Now it seems to be as the worst timing.
The worst timing. Nachman Shai of the Zionist Union Party, thank you for joining us this morning. And speaking of closing circles, because this does seem like this current crisis is semi-over, but maybe not a question of if, but when it will flare up again. For that, if you're familiar with the threats on the Israeli's border, Atai is with us in studio. So essentially, I mean, I'm looking at the border, including underground tunnels that were supposedly became tragically aware of during the summer conflict in Gaza. We saw in that reaction to the residents' complaint of digging sounds beneath their homes, the IDF began investigating today near Kibbutz Zarit, that is up north. Now, how serious, when we're looking up north in Israel, is the threat of tunnels? Because I think any civilian, be it in Israel or around the world, the idea of Hamas digging is one thing, but if we're thinking of Hezbollah, which seems to be a much more formidable foe, if they're digging tunnels, how dangerous is that for the northern civilians? Good morning of Israel.
Oh, good morning, first of all.
Yeah, I know. Finding it hard to speak.
I would like to clear a few things as long as the time has afforded us. First of all, the question is it's not if anymore.
It's when.
It's just when, where, and the most important, it's how. What combination it will be. Because if I compare the Hamas organization to the Hezbollah, so it's
apples and oranges.
It's compared between summer school to high school, or maybe
university.
even university. Yeah. Because the Hezbollah have, let's say, a vast underground medium all over south of Lebanon, a vast, which have command and control underground
headquarters,
tunnels to connect between them. And the most important thing that I would like to clarify is that Lebanon country, Lebanon have a airport, and they can bring from all over the world the technology to dig without any problem. And
I want to make I want to make sense of what you said just now, which is a terrifying notion, because as you said, Hamas tunnels, that's a place, Gaza is a place where Israel, the IDF, can go in once every 2 years, demolish the tunnels, make a dent, come out. Of course, we know tunnels then are being rebuilt. But in Hezbollah land, up in the north, what you're describing right now is like a vast array of warlike preparation headquarter tunnels.
Yes, of course, because they have the ability, they have the knowledge, nobody disturbs them. And we've seen it in 2006. We just have just a small taste, but from then till now.
In contingency military plans, because I'm sure Tal Shalev and I'm completely terrified right now. But
I don't try to terrify you.
No, I know, but I mean contingency military plans of the Israeli security forces. If this is a known fact, because clearly we're sitting on television right now and discussing it, what can be done on the Israeli part? Because if you said that this is a matter, and I agree with you, of when, not if, that Hezbollah, that this will flare up again, that the conflict will flare up again, and there's this vast array of tunnels up north.
Yes.
What can Israel do?
She should keep develop the third leg of the technology, because the intelligence, it was always good, and the operational and the boots on the ground know how to deal with this. But as long as we don't have any technology, we are lack of technology to complete. To
complete,
to complete. And the moment that you have the technology, that you can dedicate the underground medium wherever, you are in a different story. You just have to compare it to the Iron Dome. Until we had the Iron Dome, we didn't know what to do. It was the threat was terrifying. But the moment you have this system all over Israel, it's a new story. And it will take a few years, I suppose, to find the Iron Dome of the underground, but we are on the way there.
You're on the way of developing a technology that is somewhat, and I'm ad-libbing you right now, that is somewhat of an underground Iron Dome?
Hopefully. This is the vision.
This is the vision.
But it will take a few years to reach.
But what do you tell the citizens on the northern border in the meanwhile? I mean, as you said, it's a bit more threatening and intimidating than the one in the Gaza border, where there's a much more, control of the IDF. The IDF is much closer, much more capable of dealing with it. What are the reactions from the northern border citizens and residents?
I can't tell them not to be suspicious, for one hand. From the other hand, they should trust the IDF. Simply that. They don't have any other opportunity. They won't leave the settlements. They won't leave the kibbutz or the moshavs over there. They should.
But at this specific moment in time, as Tal said, Israel is not at the point where it has a technology developed that can overcome that type of tunnel, vast array of tunnels that you were describing.
She have a few parts of the technology.
But not the whole thing.
What we've seen around the settlement Zarit, it's statistic actions, because you don't have any specific intelligence, so you take some area and you start digging to find maybe
where this is heading. Yeah. But it's bits and bits of information.
This is only statistic action, not more than that.
Well, it's fascinating stuff. It's terrifying, but thank you for being with us this morning. Tal Shalev, thank you. Will be joining us in the next hour to look at the implications on the political arena of the last 24 hours. First, let's go back to some of the morning headlines before we continue. Good morning, and thank you for staying with us. January 29th, 2015, a special broadcast on I-24 News Morning Edition, taking a closer look at the escalation on the Israeli northern border yesterday. And let's go first live to the border, to I-24 News correspondent there, Shai Ben-Ari, joining us. Shai, the morning seems quiet. Also, yesterday, Hezbollah supposedly sending a message that as far as they're concerned, this escalation is over. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And what is the reaction of the population on the ground?
Yes, Yael, good morning. We are currently in Majid al-Shams, which is, of course, a Druze village in the Israeli Golan Heights, right on the Israel-Syria border. And here, I would say, the residents here have a sort of acute awareness of the, let's call it the unique geopolitical situation here. There's a sense of relief, I would say, and optimism that basically the worst is behind us, and this situation is more or less diffused itself. Really, there's an understanding that both sides have done what they need to do as far as appearances, with Hezbollah reacting to the attack in Syrian territory last week, which has been linked to Israel, of course, and Israel doing what it needs to do in retaliation to the attack on its forces yesterday. And basically, there seems to be a sense of optimism that the violence is behind us, and people have been breathing a sigh of relief. That is the sense that we're getting here in Majid al-Shams. That
this round of violence is behind us. We've had speculation, Shai, all morning in the studio on why, was this worth it, this being the alleged Israeli attack in Syria about a week and a half ago. When it comes to that, though, I'm assuming security is still very high. You have been there since yesterday. Are there extra units still beefing out the border in terms of, expecting a possible, further escalation when it comes to the military security there?
Yeah. Right. The IDF is maintaining a very high level of alert, but of course no risks can be taken with this kind of situation, and indeed all eyes are on the border, and I would say it's higher than usual. I might note that as opposed to last night, for example, we are not hearing a lot of aerial activity. We were hearing drones and jet fighters in the skies above us. Right now, I'm not hearing any of that. We do know that the area around Rajar, the village which is right on the border between Israel and Lebanon, where the incident took place yesterday, is still a closed military zone, but we understand that it is that those limitations are to be canceled in the coming hours. We hope to bring you updates from that area later on in any case. But basically, of course, the alert is still very high, and no risks are being taken. There is always a very significant, let's call it, military presence in this area because of the risks that simply exist here. But right now, I would say there's a high level of alert. But basically, there's an understanding that if nothing is initialized, let's say, by either of the sides, that we have seen the end.
That we've seen the end, and as thank you for joining us. As Shai Ben Ari so rightfully mentioned, we're hoping we've seen the end of it, and not hearing any aerial activity is always good. In studio with me, Ruthie Sinai, senior I-24 News editor. Good morning to you. And Tal Shalev, I-24 News diplomatic correspondent. Good morning. As we try and wrap our heads around the meaning of all of this and possibly, the capital gained out of it, but there was a feeling yesterday with you and I started discussing it. I think I will say it, perpetrated by the media, that we're in the midst of a terrible war. You brought us the Daily Star from Lebanon. Valid point. They covered it straightforward, which was interesting. How else?
Okay, no. Let's go to La Stampa, if we can put that up, because La Stampa, in typical Italian fashion, right? We're not seeing it, but what they're saying basically is,
there we go,
winds of war. Okay.
Yes.
Typical Italian drama. I wanted
Winds of War, Israel, Hezbollah, starring Brad Pitt.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Okay.
Herman Wouk.
Herman Wouk, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Attack of it.
So, the story itself is straightforward, but as you sort of mentioned, there is a sense that the media it's much more of a media event than a real war, although one shouldn't discount the fact, of course, that people have been killed.
If I could play advocate for the media for a moment, at least here in Israel, at least from the local point of view, I do think that this has been one of them. Yesterday was one of the most scariest and maybe tense days on that border since 2006. There was a reason for the strong reaction. There was a reason. There were a few hours yesterday that most of the citizens in Israel were experiencing. Maybe a reminder of what happened that day on the 12th of July 2006. And definitely that brings back a trauma, and everyone for sure for a few hours was sure that we're opening a war in a few minutes. It's not only the media, it was part of the public feeling. Of course, you can always ask who influences who.
Yeah, the chicken and the egg question. Part of the public feeling, but I'm wondering, because that border is so volatile, is when that feeling is perpetuated, and I'm not blaming the media at all. We love the media. We are the media. But, when that feeling is perpetuated, isn't that even as risky, as the war itself? I mean, that was my fear yesterday. But looking at the headlines around the world.
Then there's sort of an attempt to look at the whole thing more analytically. We have the Times of Israel asking, basically, will an eye for an eye suffice? Cruel as that is, I think it's very realistic.
That's the story.
That's the story, basically saying, Israel allegedly attacked and killed their guys. They not allegedly attacked and killed our guys, and is this the end of it? I would hazard a guess that the mothers of those boys killed yesterday.
And that's the cynical, horrific thing about it. The mother of those 2 Israeli soldiers that died yesterday, and I think on the mouth of everybody today, if you were in the media when we came in, was the 2 soldiers just pay for an alleged Israeli action in Syria that killed jihad. That's basically what happened.
Yeah. But if I can just add my 2 cents here, it's quite awkward to say, but if the Hezbollah retaliation would have been against Israeli citizens, we would be in a much more dangerous situation. Because
but they on purpose didn't attack.
Of course, but that's the thing. There, in many ways, the fact that there was a limited response directed to military and not to civilians does show something about the wish also on the Hezbollah side to contain the situation and not reach a full-blown escalation.
But as Israeli media was rightly pointing out yesterday, this has happened in the past where nobody has an interest in this escalation. All the media is explaining why it's not going to happen, and it happens.
And then it happens, and that because looking at the parameters, and that's what we discuss when it comes to decision making. And I'm wondering out loud, actually, also with you, Tal, when that decision was made a week and a half ago by Prime Minister Netanyahu, we don't want to be cynical and say that this is election time, that this is capital election. Is taking into account all the parameters of what may happen.
Listen, sometimes decision makers make bad decisions even when they're not in election time, and sometimes decision makers can have not really oversee the whole consequences and implications of what they decide only till in an aftermath. But I do think that decision on the 10 days ago
of January
to allegedly assassinate the Hezbollah convoy with the Iranian general, that decision will be tested by how much the situation does escalate in the end. If we finish this round of fighting, this tit for tat, as you said, eye for eye now, then I think there won't be many questioning about the timing and about the fact that Israel did decide to attack this convoy. But if this God forbid, this will escalate to a much more big confrontation, then people will start asking and questioning about that decision.
Was it worth it?
Yeah.
Yes. More headlines, though.
We have the Jerusalem Post. Jerusalem Post basically telling us that Hezbollah was in for quite a bit of reprimands yesterday in Lebanon itself. This fellow with a finger there is named Samir Jaja. He's one of the leaders of the Christian community in Lebanon.
Right.
And basically he's telling Hezbollah, look, you guys promised us that you would not drag Lebanon again into a confrontation with Israel. And, what do you think you're doing? I mean, they're going to respond. They're going to bomb us. They're going to destroy our infrastructure. They're going to kill our people. And, we told you not to do it. I think Hezbollah was likely, had this in mind when, as Tal mentioned, their decision was yesterday to hit back at military and not civilian targets.
In a very limited area.
In an area that they at least can claim is disputed internationally in terms of whose it is exactly, because the Lebanese say that it's theirs.
As we saw in a question to the State Department to Jen Psaki, is this occupied area or not? Does it really belong to Israel?
Right.
It's fascinating, all the plays that are being done here on the political chessboard. But yes, do you want to say?
Also interesting to see the connection that is being made to the Golan Heights sovereignty issue. I don't know if you've discussed this earlier before, but yesterday, while they were visiting the Golan Heights on a political visit, Tzipi Livni and Yitzhak Herzog, the leaders of the Zionist Union, declared that the Golan Heights is no longer up for negotiations. Yeah. And this is, of course, a dramatic change from the traditional point of view of labor leaders that were handling, and even Netanyahu himself handled negotiations over the Golan Heights with President Assad. But this does, in many ways, I think this could be an opportunity, and this is something that is definitely being discussed at the moment inside the Israeli government and the Israeli diplomatic system, could be an opportunity to try and maybe consolidate Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, because it is clear we're not talking about 10 years ago. If there's no one to negotiate with over the Golan Heights, and there's no way that you can that Israel will withdraw from such a place and actually have control of its security situation, given what's going on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights at the moment. So this is also coming up inside the Israeli debate.
Amos Yadlin, actually, who's the opposition's contender for defense minister.
The Zionist Union.
The Zionist Union, said as much on TV yesterday. It was interesting to hear. I sort of thought, does he have authority to say this? Yes.
And of course, then the Likud is very happy and comes to say, well, you see, you were wrong all the time, you Labor. You
left-wing. Which brings us actually to the next level of this discussion, because, luckily we can have this discussion now, because war at this specific moment in time is not happening, but elections in Israel are in 47 days from now. And I'm wondering out loud to the little bird in my ear if we do have the recent numbers when it comes to the latest poll that we are looking at, numbers that came out, I believe, was it Channel 10?
Yes.
Israeli Channel 10, and these are the numbers that we're looking at on this fateful morning. At the end of 24 hours, the Zionist Union, 25 mandates, that would be the opposition party to Benjamin Netanyahu, Likud at 23, but the more interesting numbers are actually the ones that will help make a coalition for one of the contenders, and that's the Jewish Home, Naftali Bennett's party, with 16 mandates, Yesh Atid, that's Yair Lapid, with 10, the Joint Arab List with 12, a number that may not influence anybody, and of course Meretz, that would be extreme left at 5, and Israel Beitenu at 4.
But that's the most interesting one.
That's the most interesting now.
That's on the right.
Yeah, on the
this
right.
This is Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who may not get into the Knesset.
Exactly.
And Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who was responsible and did initiate the raise of the electoral threshold in the past parliament session,
now may not survive
But you know what's hilarious about it, I might say, Lieberman is a very interesting character.
Very much so.
He's been struggling with the polls in the past 10 days at least, very substantially, suffering a substantial blow
since allegations of corruption
Since the allegations of corruption against his party. Lieberman isn't even here. One would think he would be engaged in an intense campaign trying to bring back the voters, but he flew away at the beginning of the week to Russia and to China for a diplomatic visit instead of campaigning. Very interesting notion, just to see what exactly is going on in his mind.
Yeah.
But we might say there's always this notion inside the Israeli political system about 7 lost mandates, 7 mandates that it's impossible to predict, that usually go to the center parties.
Floaters.
But these are 7 specific that belong to the center camp, and you cannot predict exactly where they were going. So one can assume that it will be divided between Lieberman's party, Yair Lapid, Moshe Kahlon. He might be passing the electoral threshold, and still Lieberman will probably be taking out some more of his weapons in the upcoming month. Just to say something about his corruption scandal investigation, this is largely labeled as a Israel Beitenu investigation. Most of the people involved are from Lieberman's party, but as the investigation develops and continues, we do see it's a very wide-scale investigation touching on an enormous amount of bodies inside the Israeli public system. So this could be more than just a party
specifically to the party
corruption.
thing. Really quick to both of you, we have 20 seconds left, almost. This poll I want to mention that came out is before. It came out yesterday, but was mentioned specifically before the escalation up north.
Correct.
So we have to look at numbers probably tomorrow, or at the beginning of next week, and see if it had any effect. Real quickly, do you think it will have an effect on Netanyahu, the escalation? No. What do you think?
No, marginal.
Marginal, if at all, and we're looking at 47 days, so with enough time for the Israeli public to forget. That said, this was it for us this morning. I-24 News morning edition of a special broadcast looking at the last 24 hours on the Israeli northern border, where there was a flare-up yesterday. We all hope that flare-up ended, and as we went to the beginning of the broadcast, Hezbollah sending a message to Israel via the UN that they would like to see this over. Of course, tomorrow is Friday. Join us with the best of this week's broadcast for I-24 News Morning Edition. We'll give you all the highlights from the week. And do not forget to tune in Monday morning, I-24 News, to your morning edition, the way you should start your day every single day. Thank you for being with us.